Hello everyone, this is Club 10M Plus's exciting new podcast that's here for you. We are all about stories, new developments and learning about individuals. Our hope is that you will join us every week to hear about our distinguished guests. We hope to inspire you, bring you laughter and make you reflect. Our guests come from all walks of life and primarily they want to share their stories. Not sure about you, but I love a good story. So Club 10M Plus have devoted their time to creating these podcasts, to sharing great ideas and stories and much more. So tune in every week to make sure that you don't miss out. It could be you next week. Want to know more? We want to hear your stories. So sign up and be our next guest. Hello and welcome to Melanie on the Pitch to the Panther today. I want to cover a subject that sometimes we don't always talk about, or we really try and avoid talking about. And once again, mental health. But this time we're talking about rural mental health and how that affects everyone. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Melanie and welcome. Tell us a little bit about rural mental health matters.
Okay, thank you. So around 17-18% of the population in England and Wales live in rural areas. And what historically tends to happen is that wellbeing and mental health support services seem to be set up in larger towns and cities. And historically, we've had lots of cuts with funding and difficulties with access for people living in rural areas to get to larger towns and conurbations. So it's been more and more difficult for people living in rural areas to access support services in rural areas, from rural areas.
That said, I mean, that stands to reason. You're in a rural area. So why, I can understand why you've not had that support. But for me, that doesn't take away the fact that you are still humans and you require that support. So in a sense, we were talking earlier, you're saying that, you had to campaign for this to make this happen. What were the challenges there?
The challenges were that these services seem to be set up around the number of people that are on a register for serious mental illnesses. And that tends to be putting people in boxes. So we said we need to get people much earlier, because if you're all approaching or coming up to a crisis, it's maybe already too late. And sadly, we are talking about suicide here. So we need to catch people a lot sooner and they feel mentally well a lot sooner before they even get anywhere near a crisis. So the campaigning that we did initially, it was before we were Rural Mental Health Matters, Save Our Mental Health. It was to look at the consultation that was done in Dorset around the support for mental health and wellbeing.
So, just for those that don't know, Dorset is very rural. I mean, you are a long way from potentially a mainline train station and all that kind of thing. So if you need any help, you are crossing boundaries and borders to get to where you need to. And if there's only a bus service running through the town, or it's a taxi, so it's not the cheapest way of moving around unless you've got your own transport. But if you are mentally unstable, that's a lot to take on, to even get out of bed and through the front door, never mind getting on a bus or a train or whatever else it is, just to go and get some support and help. So I'm going to move you a little bit more back to your own experience, because I mean, that's what's pushed you to look at this further and go through that. And, you tell your story. I'm going to sit and listen and just understand a little bit.
Okay, so I have PTSD and anxiety. And in 2020, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And throughout the whole journey, it just came out of the blue. From diagnosis to treatment, I had to have a mastectomy. I had about a month's notice, because it was words were used like, your breast is riddled with cancer and it's a threat to your life. Now, these are quite difficult things to take on board mentally. and you're focused very much on, you just want the cancer out, really. But looking back, I'm now waiting for reconstruction and I am in remission. I'm cancer-free, thankfully. But looking back and to now, nobody's ever asked me about my mental health. And I had a breakdown in March last year and I just had no idea where to go, and diagnosed with PTSD. And thankfully, I do have counselling now. I'm actually in my second lot of counselling with a wonderful charity called We Hear You, who are in Somerset, but that's another county. So that's my nearest, and that's about a 40-minute drive.
So there again, we go back to the rural aspect of everything. Now, your story is, incredible, because we all know the journey that we've all been on just recently. We've all survived. I would call it the closest thing any of us will actually understand to the crisis where the world has just melted down in front of us. And we've hit that whole, I'm going to relate to it as a reset button. During that reset button, a lot of us were still having to live. We were still having to do our day-to-day things. And in the middle of all of that, you've managed to have to be in a hospital where it was the last place you probably wanted to be, going through a process and a procedure, then to just make it compoundingly more painful. No one asked you how you were doing mentally.
No, which I find really bizarre looking back. And at the time you're focused on cancer, right? It's a very scary word in itself. So you're focused on cancer, you're panicking. The main thing is get it out of me. But when all of that's calmed down, and then you realise nobody actually asked me if I'm all right here, which inevitably actually brings me on to the subject of most people that have a diagnosis of cancer will then have a subsequent diagnosis of PTSD at some point, because it's such a huge trauma. So it begs the question, why aren't we, right at the beginning, when somebody has that cancer diagnosis, why aren't we like the adverts on TV with Macmillan? You've got this picture of somebody, they're told they've got cancer, they go to pass out behind them, and then there's a nurse there. In reality, there isn't anybody there, and nobody asks you. And there are some people that do get really, really good support, but there are some people that don't get any. And this is what we're talking about as well, the disparity. It's very hit and miss based on where you live.
Yeah, so it's always going to be regional issues that you're going to come across. But I mean, for you now, looking back, I mean, I'm listening to you and just going, well, actually, the best resolve we can all have is almost this process that's in place. You've been diagnosed, and before we send you off to do the treatment and have the treatment, we take you aside and give you a heads up of what you're going to face if you're that person. Even if you hear it or don't hear it, or it's a 10-minute course that kind of takes you through it, or a video or something and says, listen, you're going to hit some trauma because this is traumatizing. What you're going to go through is traumatizing. And we all know that a car crash can be traumatizing. So how is an operation not traumatizing?
Yeah.
How is trying to get rid of something that's in your body that you know doesn't live there or shouldn't live there, and you have that removed? It would be as traumatizing as having your leg cut off, because it's a part of you.
Yeah.
Something removed from you is enough. And I almost think that a lot of people don't appreciate when they have operations and things like that. It's trauma that we're going through because we're being sedated or suppressed or whatever you want to call it. Plus we're going through a cutout, and then we're being put back together. Thank you, doctors. You do an amazing job. But nobody's told me how I'm going to feel about that, or I've not had a chance to talk about it. And this is where trauma is therapy. Well, trauma people or trauma persons need therapy post anything they have. So in a nutshell, Melanie, what is the message that we all should be taking on board right now and understanding? Such a vast topic, because I mean, we could talk for hours about health and how people react and relate. But what's your takeaway? What are you telling us today that we should look out for?
Okay, so what we're trying to do with Rural Mental Health Matters is to say to organisations that provide any support, whether it's cancer, whether it's if you lost a baby, if you've had any sort of trauma, it doesn't even have to be huge, any organisations that provide wellbeing and mental health support, that to look at the area that you cover and maybe think about how you could make your service more rurally inclusive. Because people aren't hard to reach. It's just that organisations are struggling to reach them. And that's where we came up with the outreach, Rural Mental Health and Wellbeing outreach project that we have in Shaftesbury, which is a rural town, and it's 20 miles away from the nearest hospital and 28 miles away from the nearest mental health facility. So it's a long way. And what we're trying to do is to have a central, fully accessible location where people, members of the public, can just come in, have a cup of tea, because it all starts with a cup of tea and a conversation, and we can say to them, look, we've invited all these different organisations from across Dorset that provide Dorset-wide services, but they're not necessarily in our area, but they're here today, and if you want to talk to them, everybody's under one roof. If you need carer support, if you need support to getting into work, or if you need support with your mental health. And that's the idea. So the takeaway is really to start with a conversation, to tell people around you how you're feeling, and maybe people want to help. Maybe those people can then put you in touch with a service so you don't feel sort of overwhelmed, sitting in front of the laptop, not knowing where to start with your own mental health, on where to go, on what to search for, because that's another issue. Because there are services out there, it's just making sure that people are aware of them.
So let's get aware, let's find out, and most of all, everything's available now on the internet. We have no reason why we can't communicate and connect. And thank you so much for your time today, Melanie, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And just end with saying that our next steps are going to be actually mobile rural outreach, which would be amazing. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for that. Thanks. Hello, everyone. This is Club 10M Plus's exciting new podcast that's here for you. We are all about stories, new developments, and learning about individuals. Our hope is that you will join us every week to hear about our distinguished guests. We hope to inspire you, bring you laughter, and make you reflect. Our guests come from all walks of life, and primarily, they want to share their stories. Not sure about you, but I love a good story. So Club 10M Plus have devoted their time to creating these podcasts, to sharing great ideas and stories, and much more. So tune in every week to make sure that you don't miss out. It could be you next week. Want to know more? We want to hear your stories, so sign up and be our next guest.